right, everybody, we're going to welcome in Professor Saeed Mohammed Marandi. He's been all over. He's like on 300 shows every week, and we're very glad to have him here today to talk about the latest in Iran. I'll start off by talking a little bit about what happened last week when there seemed to be a reemergence of the war. It started way back when the United States and others accused Iran of attacking the major UAE's critical export hub. And Iran had denied responsibility on that. And then the United States went back and essentially reacted to try to get the Gulf back, because the Gulf had basically tried to exclude them from being able to navigate in the region that they needed. And so it became this back and forth, and everybody came about it very confused in the West. They were trying to figure out how to blame Iran for all of this, but it was the United States that initially began violating the ceasefire. And then we saw Donald Trump begin and end constantly with this, oh, we won the war, but now, oh, Iran will see that they've lost everything as well. So it was a very, very interesting time. Iran did target the US warships, and then the United States, of course, struck Kesh and Manab. And so I want you to give us a little bit of a summary of what happened from your perspective, and how really this made in the United States looked weak. In my opinion, I felt that it made them look completely unprepared, weak, and also showed much of the lying that they've been doing to the world completely bare.
Sure. Well, thank you very much for inviting me. First, we all know the war was unprovoked, and I think the Americans and the Israeli regime thought that they would win the war in a couple of days. And I think many people across the world did, even though we've been saying for years now that no such thing will happen. But of course, when we say it, they say it's propaganda, but we are where we are now. After the first couple of days, I think it was Trump declared that Iran must surrender unconditionally. And ultimately, after 39 days, the United States accepted the Iranian 10-point plan as the framework for negotiations. And that was a symbolic victory for Iran, a major, I think, victory. Iran didn't expect the Americans to ever implement the 10-point plan. It doesn't see the United States as sincere in any way or form, but it was important. So then we had the ceasefire, and the ceasefire was agreed upon, but the Americans and the Israelis began to violate it from the start. Netanyahu immediately began carpet bombing Lebanon, including neighborhoods that weren't even affiliated, or I shouldn't say affiliated, but sympathetic to the resistance. And the reason why I say I shouldn't say affiliated is because the Western media justifies atrocities against civilians by calling these neighborhoods Hezbollah strongholds. They're just apartment blocks that are being carpet bombed, and Western journalists like to try to make it seem as if it's something else. But in any case, they even bombed neighborhoods that were not sympathetic to the resistance. Why? Because he wants to make sure that the ceasefire would collapse. And it did, because as a result, Iran refrained from allowing ships linked to the 5 countries that were part of the war against Iran to leave the Strait of Hormuz, meaning Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, the Emirates, Qatar, and Bahrain. Other ships can come and go. That's one of the myths that we hear in Western media. The Strait of Hormuz has never been closed. It's been only closed to those countries that have been hostile to Iran, who participated in the war directly or indirectly. Ships to Pakistan and India have passed through. Just yesterday, I think an LNG ship from Qatar went to Pakistan from the Strait. So it's not as if it's completely closed. But some ships that are linked to these 5 countries, like yesterday's to Qatar, they go through a negotiated process because, again, Qatar participated in the war and helped kill thousands of Iranians. So Iran refrained from allowing those ships to pass through because of the genocidal strikes on Lebanon. And ultimately, after 10 days of pressure, Netanyahu accepted the ceasefire. Of course, we know that after a day or two, he restarted the slaughter and continues to massacre Lebanese civilians every day. But we won't hear it in the Western media because, of course, they're all Amalek. While the Iranians refrained from allowing those ships to pass through, the Americans, because of the violation, the ceasefire violation, because Trump also said that no, Lebanon is not a part of the ceasefire, whereas the Pakistani mediator said no, it is. That was agreed upon. So instead of saying that Iran is in the right, Trump imposed a siege on first the Persian Gulf, but then when he saw that was very foolish, he focused on Iranian ports. And when Netanyahu finally accepted the ceasefire, as I said earlier, Iran said, okay, now those ships can leave. They can use the Strait of Hormuz. And then Trump in response said, but we're keeping the siege on Iran in place, which is a violation of the ceasefire and an act of war. So as a result of that, Iran said, okay, then those ships are not leaving. So effectively, ever since the ceasefire, the United States and the Israeli regime have placed an embargo on the entire world. For 39 days, the ships couldn't go through for the most part. Since then, the ships still don't go through because of the siege that violates the ceasefire, and before that, and because of the bombing of Lebanon and the slaughter in Lebanon. So that's basically where we are. Now, a few days ago, and sorry if it sounds a bit confusing, but it is a bit confusing. But a few days ago, the United States, they initiated an attack. It began with Americans, actually. They struck a couple of Iranian tankers, and then the Iranians retaliated. They fired on U.S. ships, but they also hit, well, the Iranians say they didn't hit targets in the Emirates. And there is reason to believe that there were a combination of that Iran did strike, but also others struck the Emirates too. So the Iranians did not take responsibility for the strike on the Emirates, but obviously the Emirates is the closest to the Israeli-American camp. They are more interested in continuing this war than the other 4 countries in the Persian Gulf that were implicated. But it does seem that it wasn't that the Emirates was struck by more than one actor. Let's put it that way. But the interesting thing is that the Americans tried to enter the Strait of Hormuz, Project Freedom, and to help facilitate ships that were affiliated to these 5 countries that had the goods of these 5 countries through the strait. After all that happened, the final result is that no ships have left. And so it was a failed operation. Now, whether the Saudis did or did not cooperate, that still remains to be seen. It's not yet clear whether they cooperated with Americans or not, because some say the Saudis did not cooperate. They are afraid of escalation and that their remaining oil exports would be hit. I can't say for certain, but this U.S. operation failed. The siege is also not having the impact that the Americans want. Otherwise, they wouldn't have had this operation. All they would have to do is just sit back and wait for Iran to starve, as they like to believe it will. I mean, we've seen senators literally come on television with excitement saying that there's no food in Iran, really taking pleasure in the notion that Iranian kids have no food, U.S. senators. But that's not the case. I mean, there is food, there are people are living, but of course the economy is suffering, not only because of the siege, but more importantly because of the airstrikes on schools, on hospitals, on pharmaceutical factories, on the Iranian steel industry, on thousands of people many thousands of people have lost their homes. because they targeted apartment blocks. You know, for example, sometimes they would just bomb apartment blocks, but sometimes they would target wait for a person to go to his family to visit his family, and then they would destroy the whole block and kill everyone inside. Um, so we are right now in this situation where the world is suffering an economic crisis, and Iran is under siege. And I personally think that the Iranians will be able to outlast the United States because Iranians are united. You've been to Iran, you've seen Iran under very different circumstances. Even back then, they could not undermine the country. Today, the people are much more united than ever before. I'm not saying that everyone is on the same page or everyone is united, but overwhelmingly Iranians are. And it's not just simply the rallying around the flag effect. If you don't have a legitimate government, people will not rally around the flag that easily. But we've been seeing people gathering on the streets every night for since the first day of the war, which is 2.5 months almost now, and in large numbers across the country. And polls indicate that people are prepared to make major sacrifices for Iran to succeed, because at the end of the day, this is a war um, where Iran's fate is determined. It is an existential war for the country. Whereas for the Americans, it's a war of choice. They've carried out this war to assist Netanyahu, to assist the Zionists. As Joe Kent said in his resignation letter, Iran is not a threat to the United States. Iran was not pursuing nuclear weapons. It's the Zionist lobby and the Israeli regime that wanted this war. So Americans and the world are suffering at the hands of Netanyahu and Zionism. The Iranians, on the other hand, they are struggling against this aggressor, or this group of aggressors. But they know that they're the victims. They did not cause the war. They did not start the war, and that this is an existential battle for their survival because their enemies want to destroy the country.
I don't know about that, Professor Marandi. I think we might have a little disagreements as far as just for Israel. There's a lot of Western corporations, multinational corporations, that are making a lot of money off this war over here. So I wouldn't exclude them, because I think there's a kind of an element here in the West that is happy that if they blame Israel for everything, they're actually trying to make America look like a victim, right? You see a lot of these accounts promoted, these now conservative accounts that now want to talk about Israel being bad. And they also conflate the difference between a Jewish person and a Zionist. There are more Christian Zionists in the United States than there are actually Jewish Zionists. So aren't the Christians to blame as well? I mean, that's something to think about, because there's a lot of money being made by not just the Zionists out there. And obviously a lot of these wars are fought for Zionism. But you understand what's going on in America. You understand the way the corporations fit into all of this. Aren't they just as much to blame? Aren't they accomplices just as much as the Zionists themselves? I mean, these are all American bombs that are being dropped in Iran, in Gaza, in Lebanon. So aren't they just as much to blame as the Zionists themselves?
Oh, without a doubt, you're absolutely correct. The military-industrial complex, as they say, is key in all this. And you're right, they're just like ISIS and Al Qaeda exists, and they kill people with Qatari funding, with Erdogan support, and with Saudi support, and others. They kill in the name of Islam. Zionists, Jewish Zionists, they kill in the name of Judaism, and Christian Zionists kill in the name of Christianity. And all of them are condemned by anti-Zionist Jews, anti-Zionist Christians, and of course anti-ISIS and Al Qaeda,
Yeah.
And anti-Takfiri Muslims. So you're right about that. But I was just alluding to, I mean, the best way to put it is the Epstein class, and the Epstein class is comprised of the oligarchy. Many of them are Jewish Zionists, many Christian Zionists. But in any case, it doesn't. it doesn't do the American people any good. The money that they make doesn't trickle down, regardless of its complete immorality and illegitimacy. But it doesn't trickle down to ordinary Americans, and that's why the economic situation for American people is much worse today than it was years ago. I don't know much about the United States. I can't claim to know a great deal. I haven't lived there as an adult at any point, but the United States that I knew when I was a child before the revolution, and then when my family moved back to Iran, was a country which had the best bridges, the best roads, the best infrastructure, the best public education.
Those days are long
And
gone. They are
yes,
long over. Yeah.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Fam, do you mind if I follow up real quickly? Because I know it was kind of like a pit stop. I apologize, fam. But Professor Marandi, I'll keep on looking at this thing called Kalshi and Polymart, right? Which are these sites that you could bet on, politics or war, all this other stuff. There was a joke actually made by this comedian, Robert Smigel, who does this dog Triumph, and he asked Marco Rubio, Marco, give me some advice. What's the next war we're going to start? I'm trying to make some money on Polymart. But if I was going to ask you, because one of the 10 points within the agreements from the Iranians was the United States has to leave the region. They have to leave these Gulf states. When I look at these Gulf states, right? I mean, I don't mean to be disrespectful, but I'm going to be. They're not even real countries, right? The UAE, who used to be part of Saudi Arabia, whatever. Bahrain was part of Iran. Kuwait was part of Iraq. Qatar, another monarchy. Which one of these countries is going to, in your mind, is going to have a revolution first from what you're seeing there in the Gulf? Because with Riyadh saying, hey, man, Project Freedom is going to stop because you're not going to use our bases, there seems to be some understanding from these Gulf states that, man, this wasn't maybe the best move to align ourselves with the Americans because they're really not even protecting our bases, whatnot. This is going to cause an uprising maybe in our country. Which one of these countries do you think is going to have a revolution first?
Well, first, I think we have to keep in mind that these bases were never about security for these countries. They were about Israel. And the objective to create these bases were to protect Israel. And that's why they were never used to protect the people of these countries. When the Iranians began striking back, the Americans were not trying to protect these countries. They were trying to protect their own soldiers and Israelis. I think that a lot that has disillusioned many of these dictators in the Persian Gulf region and the elites who've made a lot of money over the last few decades as a result of the sales of oil and gas and LNG and so on. And the kickbacks that they get from purchasing weapons from the United States. I mean, Qatar, a country of 350,000 maybe, they have purchased all sorts of weapons. They don't even have the manpower to use them. The same is true with the Emirates, Bahrain, Kuwait. Saudi Arabia is a country which is named after a family. So it is tribal, and the legitimacy of the state, the current state, is always open to question. It doesn't have a civil society in the way in which, let's say, countries like Iran or Turkey or Iraq or Egypt have, with Egypt with all its problems. So some believe that in Saudi Arabia, if things go sour, the country could just break up into pieces. Who knows? But right now we're in a situation where, and I'm not sure, again, I have to stress that I don't know what the Saudis are going to do. If the United States launches an assault on Iran, they'll have to use Saudi airspace for it to be effective. So we don't know if the Saudis are serious or if they're just they want some concessions from the United States. So the Iranians are prepared for war, and the working assumption in Tehran is that we'll have a major assault on the country in the coming days. It may be until after Trump goes to China, but that is the assumption. It doesn't mean that it's inevitable, But the Americans haven't kept all these troops and all this equipment in the Arabian Peninsula for nothing. It's very costly, much more costly than what Hegseth has admitted to. And the weather is getting very bad. I mean, you've traveled around. You know that in the summer months, like 5, 6 months in the summer, the Arabian Peninsula, the heat is just unbelievable. And if there's another war and the United States, based on what Trump says, starts striking Iran's critical infrastructure, then Iran will strike back at critical infrastructure in occupied Palestine and Israel, as well as in the region. And in the summer, in that heat and humidity, if Iran strikes their like electrical power plants, then everyone will have to leave, including U.S. soldiers. It's just not possible to live there for ordinary people, especially those who've had such a luxurious lifestyle in the past. So it could just be that these countries fall apart. And I'm pretty sure that if there's a major war and things get bad, the first people to leave will be the rulers because they have billions of dollars, each of them, in American banks, or they purchased mansions and palaces and you know expensive apartment buildings in expensive neighborhoods and expensive countries. So they will be fine, the elites. So I don't know if there will be a revolution or there will be collapse. And if there's collapse, then I think that you can imagine that the underclass in these countries, they could take over. I mean, for example, let's look at the Emirates itself. It's a country with, I think, 1.1 million citizens, maybe 1.2. I don't know the exact number, but there may be up to 10 million people living there. I mean, before the war, I don't know what the numbers are now. So if the regime collapses, it may turn out to become a non-Arabic speaking country because most people don't even belong to that part. They come from the subcontinent. They come from the Philippines.
Philippines, yeah.
If they take over, then you have a very different state of affairs. Or if ordinary people, citizens in the Emirates, take over. The same could be said about Qatar as well. It's a tiny country with a strong majority of its population being workers and indentured servants and slaves, in a sense, in the case of many. Bahrain, of course, it's the regime has been trying to crush its people for a very long time. But I have non-Muslim friends in Bahrain, in Kuwait. I don't speak to any Kuwaiti at all because I don't want to get anyone into trouble. I don't speak to any a citizen from any of these countries that live in these countries. I make sure I steer clear of my friends. But I have a couple of Western friends in Kuwait, and one of them told me just 4 or 5 days ago that in Kuwait people support Iran. The even when they're striking Kuwait, the majority of the people, so he says, support the strikes because they don't like the regime. They don't like any of these regimes. They see them as obedient family regimes that give all the money to the West and put it in U.S. stocks and bonds and buy weapons that they can't use. They don't even have the population to use those weapons. It's all about kickbacks and commissions and money and kickbacks on the other side. U.S. senators, they're people close to them, and congressmen and women and elites. So these regimes don't have public legitimacy. That makes them very vulnerable. So if there is another round of fighting, which is quite possible. I'm not saying it's inevitable, but it's quite possible because at the end of the day, Netanyahu, when you look at him on 60 Minutes, it seems like he's the decider, and he is the one who will make the decision, not Donald Trump. So I'm not saying that he will be able to do whatever he wants. I actually think that as the economic punishment increases, more people in the United States will start saying that we have to prioritize U.S. interests over Israeli regime interests. I mean, among the elites, I think already among ordinary people that sentiment exists among the majority. But I think even among the elites, there is a possibility that some of them will start saying, "Look, we have to be wary about chaos at home and unrest at home and we have to finally prioritize the United States over Israel. So I don't know if that will happen. I don't know at what stage that would happen, but at least for the time being, listening to the 60 Minutes interview, it seems that the chances are high because it seems that Netanyahu wants war. So
You
I don't
know,
know about revolution because,
Yeah.
for example, some people speak about Bahrain,
Yeah.
but the Saudis regularly send in troops to crush the population.
Yeah.
Or, for example, Kuwait right now, as I said, so I'm told that people are sympathetic to the Iranians from all ethnic and religious backgrounds. But
Yeah.
it's unclear. I think the biggest question is whether these regimes will survive. For example, the Emirates, Dubai, and Abu Dhabi, if there's no electricity in the summer, who
Yeah.
can stay there? It's just not possible.
I'm betting on
you know,
Bahrain, fam. I think
yeah.
that Professor Morandi's kind of tipping his hat towards Bahrain. Thank you, Professor.
Yeah, I agree with Bahrain. Professor, since you mentioned it, right, if there is another attack, Donald Trump has gone on several tirades. One where he said Iran's demands are unacceptable. Iran's demands are lifting the sanctions, right, as Pasta mentioned, getting getting the US and Israel out of the region, no strikes on Lebanon, getting Lebanon out of the attacks that it's under by Israel. It mentioned, like I said, lifting the sanctions, unfreezing the assets. It also mentioned reparations and Iranian control, recognition of what's always been, right, Iran's control of the Strait of Hormuz. These are very logical demands that Iran is asking, and Donald Trump is saying these are unacceptable. Simultaneously, Iran has said that they would strike any of the US military bases if their ships are struck as well. So it doesn't seem to me like there is an end to this, because there's no, Iran isn't going to give in, and you can probably talk more about that. From my perspective, Iran isn't going to give in into what the US demands are, which are the stopping the enrichment of uranium, stopping pretty much anything that, in my opinion, gives Iran the ability to survive, because this is, as you said, existential. If Iran doesn't continue doing what it's always been doing, then this is, an existential crisis. And I think it's very obvious to many of us that that's what it is, because Iran does seem to be fighting the entirety of the Epstein class right now on behalf of the world, when nobody else has really done that except Iran and the resistance. So my question to you is, what is the solution at this point when the United States isn't going to give in to Iran's demands, and Iran is not going to allow the United States to dictate the over their sovereignty, which is essentially what it's trying to do?
It's really interesting. A couple of nights ago, I went to one of these squares just to see what's going on, and there was this cleric, this religious figure, giving a speech in the square to the public, to the people gathered there, and saying that this fight is not just about Gaza, it's not just about Palestine, it's not just about Lebanon, it's not just about he mentioned the school kids in Minab that were killed. He said and I actually used this in a tweet. It's about uh, the children in Cuba, and the hostages, the people who've been taken hostage in Venezuela, and this is about the entire. This is we're fighting on behalf of the entire uh, global majority that's been taken hostage by the Americans. So I thought that was an interesting speech. I sort of stole a couple of things from that and did a tweet the other night. But
You borrowed it, Professor, not
yes,
stole it. You borrowed it, please.
but I think that you're absolutely correct. First of all, the Iranian demands are very reasonable. It was an unprovoked war. They began that war by killing 168 little kids at an elementary school. They never took responsibility. They never apologized. The belief here, and my belief is that it was intentional, because I've been in war. And I know that in major operations, in any operation, the first phase of an operation, which is going to be carried out, all the targets are very well vetted, especially if it's a major operation. They can be vetted for like months, sometimes years. So all the targets, because the first strike is the most important strike, because you want to catch your enemy off guard. You want to be able to have the upper hand, gain the momentum, and you have time. You have time to figure out what is where, and what your strengths are and what their strengths are. They struck that school as their in the first wave of the attack. That was the first thing that they did, alongside murdering the leader. The martyrdom of Ayatollah Khamenei coincided with the martyrdom of those children and a couple of dozen of school teachers and school staff. So, in my opinion, I cannot see it as being anything other than intentional. The school was beside close to a military base. And so many of the children were the children of officers, and it's believed that the Americans wanted to teach those officers and Iranian officers a lesson by wiping out their families. But in any case, and some may say, no, it's not possible. Well, that's what they've been doing in Gaza day and night with the help of the West. In Lebanon, that's what they're doing as we speak. But also throughout the war against Iran, they were bombing hospitals. They were carrying out double tap attacks many, many times. One was filmed by a woman who survived the first attack, and then she was killed in the second attack. So they've been. I have a friend. I mentioned this on another show. I have a friend who lives in the south of Iran. His brother-in-law, who also lives in his city, he has a small business, and he hired two truck drivers to take some goods from either to his city or to a different city, or vice versa. I don't know. And the Americans bombed both trucks, killing the truck drivers and destroying the trucks, which belonged to the truck drivers and their families, and destroyed all the goods. So that would happen every day. They were bombing ambulances. They were bombing. They were bombing agricultural centers and
Police stations.
farms.
Yeah.
All police station, local police stations. Yes,
Yeah.
all over the place. So these people can do anything. And right, as I said, U.S. senators go on television and with glee and joy say that Iranians don't have food, and only a monster thinks that. Well, only someone from the Epstein class or loyal to the Epstein class would have such a mentality. But the Iranians won the war, and the Iranian demands are all about what? Compensation. Well, you killed all these kids, you have to pay compensation to their families, among other things. Pulling back from the Persian Gulf region, you use the Persian Gulf to bomb our country, uh, respecting our sovereignty, and of course, ending the slaughter in Lebanon and in Gaza. Apparently, these are outrageous demands for an empire, but under normal circumstances, if someone carries out a crime in any society, they have to pay for that. They have to pay, and the Iranian demands are very reasonable. Yet, not just for Trump, but for the West, it is like unacceptable, because we are the empire. Uh, we are the ones in charge. You have no rights. You are nothing. You are Amalek, in a sense. You are Amalek. You're subhuman.
Yeah.
And it's very interesting that in the case of Trump and his supporters, we are of course openly subhuman and lesser people. Like and of course with Zionists, it's clear as day. That's their ideology. It's their belief. But it's strange that among liberals in the United States, when they speak of 1,001 genders and so on, that when it comes to us wiping out our people, bombing hospitals, is not something that causes any outrage whatsoever. In fact, when Trump began saying that he will obliterate Iran, and then he started saying he'll send Iran back to the Stone Age, and then he also said that he'll wipe out the civilization. He also said there'll be a glow, meaning a nuclear, the nuclear annihilation of Iran. There'll be a glow over the country. We haven't seen any serious Western journalists. I mean, serious as in mainstream, not like yourselves, mainstream journalists who work for important, well-known media outlets, legacy media, we haven't seen any of them tweet any outrage. We haven't seen the liberal or leftist, so-called liberal leftist mainstream newspapers, The Guardian or the New York Times, uh, with headlines speaking about this madness and how this person is advocating or pushing for the ultimate Holocaust. And of course, we didn't see it over Cuba either. When Trump lost the Supreme Court ruling 6-3 over tariffs, if you recall, when he gave that press conference, he said, "I can destroy countries, but I can't even impose $1 of tariffs." He meant Cuba in that press conference. No one was outraged. What do you mean destroy countries? Strangling. What they're doing now is strangling a country with their children, exactly what they did to Syria, what they attempt to do with Iran. So basically, what I'm saying is that the Epstein class is not Democratic or Republican. And the elites, whether they are liberal or left or right, those elites, those who are in the political establishment, uh, whatever left and right and liberal means in the United States is irrelevant. They are all one and the same. There's no real difference between an Obama and a Trump. In some respects, Trump may be worse because it seems to many that they may have something on him and that he's much more crude and so he's more easily manipulated. Then again, we don't have evidence that they do have anything on him, like photos of him doing things to little girls or anything like that. But he is much more crude than than the likes of Obama. But Obama, he imposed the starvation siege on Yemen. He destroyed Libya. He bombed weddings. He bombed um, innocent people.
Syria, Honduras.
He supported ISIS and Al Qaeda, along with his allies, the Saudis, the Qataris, Erdogan in Turkey, Abdullah in Jordan, and of course, it was all for the sake of the Israeli regime.
Yeah.
So there's no difference between the two. Perhaps, as I said, Trump is definitely more crude, and maybe they have things on him that makes him more open in his outrageous behavior. But fundamentally, uh, this Epstein class is just it's not Democratic or Republican. It's just a powerful oligarchy, and the likes of Trump and the likes of Obama or Biden, they're just actors who are affiliated to that class.
Professor Marandi, are you saying it's the system in the United States, not the pretend leftist or conservative president that's the problem? I mean, wow, that's crazy. That's breaking news. I know you got to go, Professor, but I have to ask this one last question because it's so important. There are a lot of people out there who are in respectable independent journalists that are putting the success on the shoulder, the success of Iran on the shoulders of China and Russia, saying, well, now that China's playing a big part, Russia's playing a big part, and that's what's really going on. And I think that's really taking away from what Iran is doing. The majority of the weapons they are using, the drones they manufacture themselves, there's a relationship with Russia and Iran. But you know the history between Russia and Iran. I mean, there was a time, I believe it was during Stalin, when they took the northern part of Iran working with the Brits. How do the Iranians view Russia? One, the government versus the people? Because from what I saw Arachi with that, when he went to Russia, I kind of saw this kind of look that he was giving them, like this look in the eye, like, we still know who you are. We know we're doing everything on our own, but, we have to form some form of alliances. How do you feel that relationship is?
Well, first I should say that Iran won the war based on its own capabilities. And while the relationship with Russia is very good and the relationship with China is also very good, at the end of the day, those capabilities, those underground cities for missiles and drones and the underground factories and the other military capabilities that the Iranians have developed, they've been preparing themselves for this war for perhaps 2 to 3 decades, depending on how you calculate. And so it was a brilliant plan. It's absolutely brilliant. And between you and me and all the people who are listening, many people in Russia and China did not think Iran would win the war. You could tell from the statements made by President Putin and the Chinese when the foreign minister went there too, that Dr. Arokci, that they were very pleasantly surprised about the performance. And of course, it's the Iranian people at the end of the day. And this is something that I've always been saying. And Western journalists like to pretend that this is just me speaking as some sort of mouthpiece, and the insultive and dismissive language that they always use. And that is that the Islamic Republic of Iran has a high degree of public legitimacy. And I see it when I walk down the streets. I don't live in a particularly religious neighborhood at all. I mean, it's not non-religious, but it's not a religious neighborhood. And when I walk down the streets, even though I rarely appear on Iranian television because I don't plan to be a public figure and I don't want to be a public personality, I basically speak for audiences outside of Iran. But whenever I'm stopped on the streets, out of every 20 times, 20 people thank me. That's how it is. And usually, even under difficult circumstances, when we had the riot, and uh, you were there when after the woman life freedom episode, I think we met in Tehran and in Mashhad. Even back then, most of the reactions to what I would be saying in media were positive. So it's not as if what the West says has. I mean, there are many people in Iran who have differing views. Many oppose the Islamic Republic. Many are for a host of different reasons, economic reasons, uh, ideological reasons, because of the shortcomings, corruption, all sorts of things. It is a very diverse country. If you sit in a taxi, you'll get let's say throughout the day, if you just spend a day going around town on a taxi, or getting and using the metro or a public bus, you'll see all sorts of different voices. You'll see people. Now it's less. Now people are much more united, but under ordinary circumstances, they'll be cursing the government, the leader, the God, poor God. But that's how society, Iranian society is. But there's always been a high degree of uh, legitimacy of the Islamic Republic. And that's why it made it so easy to rally around the flag. Remember, Ayatollah Khamenei was martyred on day one. And we didn't have a leader for at least a week because they couldn't gather to choose a new leader for security reasons. So, in accordance with the Constitution, we had a leadership council, but that's just something provisional. It's not something that you can run a war with against a superpower with all its allies. Yet it was the Iranian people who went to the streets and kept the cities safe, and there were no huge lines in the gasoline stations. There were no people were not running to supermarkets, emptying them, buying all the food and canned food and bread. Life was very normal. And so it was really the people more than anything else. I mean, the armed forces immediately started hitting back in less than an hour, but without the people, Iran couldn't have succeeded. So while the Russians and the Chinese did assist Iran, and so have other countries too, other friendly countries, but the just like in Lebanon, Hezbollah, Iran helps Hezbollah, but without the popular support that they have, I mean, they're surrounded by, in Beirut, the government is a puppet government. The prime minister and the president are agents of the United States. Syria is controlled by US proxies, ISIS and Al Qaeda. They won't even now while Hezbollah is fighting, and they won't even use this opportunity to fight back to take their territory. Why? Because it's a proxy regime. installed by the empire. So, but Hezbollah, despite all that, it is beating back the Israelis, and the Israelis, in their rage, constantly carpet bomb towns and villages and cities because they're monsters. But the point is that Iran provides Hezbollah with support, but without the people themselves being steadfast, that support would be meaningless. In the case of Iran, Iran purchases whatever it needs from abroad, whether it's the Chinese or the Russians, but they are friendly countries. We do have a bad history with Russia, but I think that actually has changed a lot ever since the collapse of the Soviet Union. Not because of the collapse of the Soviet Union, because relations were improving under Gorbachev, regardless of whether he was a strong or weak leader. But after the collapse of the Soviet Union, when the Russians no longer had that showed those imperial ambitions, the relationship changed and evolved. And over the past few years, they've actually become very good. And there's always been a skepticism among many in Iran about Russia, but I think that is decreasing because of Russia's actions in the UN Security Council. The same is true with China. The Chinese so far have the relationship with China has improved a lot. And I have to say that all of this is really thanks to Trump and Biden and Obama and Bush and all those presidents who've been acted as catalysts to bring all these different countries together. The United States has done an excellent job in bringing countries from who in the past really had little to do with each other closer to each other. I mean, as an example, the Iranians and the Russians are developing what's called the North-South Transport Corridor. You would think that it's a very important corridor. You would think that this would have been developed decades ago, actually maybe 100 years ago, but they never did. And it was only until Russia and Iran both became sanctioned, especially after Russia was sanctioned, that the two sides sat together and said, well, let's develop this corridor so we don't have to be dependent on the West. So a lot of what's happening in the world is thanks to the West. They are isolating themselves. They're telling the world that they're genocidal, the elites, after what they did in Gaza. And now this war, which is causing a global economic crisis, the world is seeing the United States, Israel, and Zionism as the reason for the growing misery.
We've had
Professor,
Professor
before you
Marandi.
go,
Go ahead.
I know. I just have one last question before you go. This has been plastered all over the internet. The internet in Iran doesn't work. People are angry. This is what a lot of not just Western media but social media is putting out there. Can you just respond to the internet situation and what that really is like right now?
Well, before the war, we had internet, and it was like Russia, where for some things you would need a VPN. Like Telegram or Twitter. But
oh no. I really wanted a question. That's weird. Okay, well, if we lost him, we lost him, but yeah.
They said that's enough.
Was kinda...
How's the internet in Iran? Well, let me tell you about the internet. Click. Oh, there he is.
Oh, there
Professor Marandi, we got you back.
As soon as you started saying the internet, it just decided.
Yeah, right. I know it answered our question.
But the problem, though, is I've changed my connection, and this connection is probably not very good. But so I'll speak slowly because I figured out that if you speak more slowly, there's less disruption. What was I saying?
The internet,
the
Russia
internet.
VPN.
Yeah, okay. So before the war, we had internet. You needed VPNs for some things like Telegram or Twitter, for example, like in Russia. But when the war started, they shut down the international connection. So during the war, we had the ability to go to Iranian websites, or except for the first 2-3 days, I guess. I'm not good at dates, but Iranian websites, Iranian apps. Gradually, they became operational. But the reason why the internet was disconnected was because the Americans and Israelis were using it to target people and to target and to figure out how effective their strikes were for a double tap attack. So they shut, because that's something that they learned from the 12-day war. During the 12-day war, they were also using drones through the internet. A lot of things were being used by the enemy with the internet. So they shut it down, the international connection. I used a studio to do interviews. So, I would go to a studio and get a connection. I'd receive messages from people who wanted to do interviews. I would spend half a day in the studio. They probably wanted me to leave, but I wouldn't leave, because if I had left, I wouldn't have a connection. So I spent much of my the war going to one studio after another, mostly one studio, because they were more friendly. They were more they were more tolerant of my constant usage of their internet connection. After the war, it is opened up, but it is still not completely normal. VPNs are expensive now, but people do see my interviews, because most of my interviews are online, and they're not. I rarely do mainstream media anymore. I usually don't even respond to requests. Not always, but usually. So a lot of people do see it, but the connection is not like it was before, and even now, my connection is not ideal. But it is because we are in a state of war still, and we could have a major assault tonight. We could have a major assault right now. We've been waiting for a major assault for the last 2 weeks at least. Hopefully, when the war is over, things will go back to normal, but we'll have to see how long it will take for us to get there.
Professor
Thank you
Marandi,
so
we're
much,
out of time.
Professor.
Yeah, we're pretty much out of time. I thank you so much for coming on. I got to get to Iran. I want to do the whole Anthony Bourdain thing and just do all the food of Iran, because I think that's a great way to, because the mindset of a lot of Americans of what they think of Iran, they think that everybody in that region is just like a radical Islamic, whatever. I mean, you hear these senators going, these people are drinking blood out of the boots of, and they want to hear death to America, and it's crazy. But thank you so much for coming on.
Just one thing that I'd like to add, and that is the death to America. Death to America is a chant that is widely said in Iranian gatherings, political gatherings, but it is not a literal, no one should take it literally. It's like saying Yankee go home.
Yeah.
If like an American travels to a country, in the past in Latin America, where they would say Yankee go home, or somewhere else, that they're not talking about that individual. They're talking about the empire. It's not directed at ordinary Americans. Death to America, when they chant that, it means death to the American empire. It means the same empire that has helped carry out genocide in Gaza, that is carrying out another ethnic cleansing in Lebanon, that has slaughtered so many Iranians, 168 little kids, mostly little girls, without even acknowledging what they did. That is exactly what they're alluding to. So when they say they chant death to America, that it is about empire. But in any case, even if they chant, people be slaughtered.
Yeah. It looks like the internet's cutting out. I was going to say that, Fiorella always makes fun of our friend Kit from Chicago for the pizza. My friend, my connection in Iran, tells me, he goes, Pasta, the main thing is we have to maintain our sovereignty, because we don't want Starbucks or McDonald's or Pizza Hut coming in, because in Iran, in every town, there's all these different great pizzerias. So I got to get out to Iran to try the pizza out there. I can't wait, Professor Marandi. I hope you know a couple good spots. So
we'll definitely go to them together.
Definitely, my friend. Thank you so much for joining the show.
We'll see you
Thank
next
you very
time.
much for having me. Thank you.
Be safe out there, Professor.
You too.
We will. Thank you.